Hello, this is the sermon for the 8th Sunday after Pentecost, and the text is the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Today's story from Luke's Gospel has what appears to be an easily applicable lesson, albeit one that involves a certain amount of finger-wagging. Jesus says, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Now, we would understandably interpret Jesus' words from our individualist perspective as a reminder that there is more to life than acquiring stuff. But there is more to this story than that trite and much belabored moral. We tend to miss the social dimension of what Jesus says in this story. In the culture of Jesus' day, wealth, among other things, was considered to be a limited good. That is, there was only so much of it to go around. What that means is that the accumulation of goods for the wealthy man necessarily carries with it a diminishment in resources for others. If one person received more than usual, it was at the expense of others. We would not see the rich farmer's bumper crop as adversely affecting anyone else, but Jesus' hearers would have. And it is notable that the rich man of the parable does not think about the wider community of which he is a part, but notably talks only to himself and thinks of no one but himself. He thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.'" When the rich man dies suddenly, the average peasant in Jesus' day would have thought that he was getting his just deserts for not sharing his abundance with the community as he should have. Now, unlike in Jesus' culture, in our society we do not view wealth as a limited good. So, by our lights, that the rich man of the parable enjoyed an unexpected abundance of produce from his land means only that he was lucky. According to the perception of our society, if someone generates abundant wealth by luck or by skill, it is for the benefit of all. As the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. But what our society perceives, however, does not line up with what is actually happening. There is growing income inequality in Canada, among other countries. According to Statistics Canada, income inequality hit a record high in the first quarter of this year, with the wealthiest, the top 20% of Canadians, holding over 2/3 of the total net worth of all Canadians, while the bottom 40% of Canadians hold only just over 3% of the total net worth. And this gap has widened more and more since the pandemic, with the highest income households earning ever more and more, while the wages of the lowest income households have declined in that time. And the problem with growing income inequality is that it can lead to financial instability, to the capture of our political system by the elites, and to the creation of a culture of envy, according to one study. Making the problem worse, the subject of wealth tends to be taboo in Canadian society, much like how the Madrigal family in the Disney film Encanto don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about money. No, no, no. Another issue is that the solution to growing inequality is a matter of policy. It is beyond our capacity as individuals to solve inequality. Now, we are not helpless. We can advocate for solutions to inequality to our elected officials, for instance, but there is only so much that we can do. Now, Jesus obviously does not provide guidance as to how to enact policy in 21st century capitalist societies in order to address inequality. He warns against greed and ends the parable of the rich fool by saying, "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." Jesus here offers warning, but does not say how to be rich toward God. Our lectionary skips over the part of Luke's Gospel in which Jesus does offer guidance as to how to be rich toward God, which is his famous teaching about not worrying. He says, "Do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying. For it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive after his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well." Now it is bold of Jesus to say this sort of thing, as the vast majority of his hearers would have been subsistence farmers, living hand to mouth on a daily basis. It is hard to imagine how they could not worry about what they are to eat or drink, how they are to get by from day to day. But what Jesus is getting at is that it is fear that motivates selfish acquisitiveness, something that can afflict rich and poor alike. If we are driven by anxiety over securing our needs, we deny the value of relationships and of community. But it is precisely relationships with others, particularly with God, and being embedded in a loving community that is for Jesus the good life. Striving for God's kingdom, which means living according to the values espoused by Jesus, creates a community characterized by supporting and loving relationships, generosity, and forgiveness. So wealth in and of itself is not evil. It is how we use our wealth that matters. And as followers of Jesus, we are called to use the resources that we have been given to create and sustain communities of love, generosity, and forgiveness, communities which embody God's kingdom. This means, among other things, being willing to talk about money. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to publicly confess our net worth. It means that we be willing to talk to our loved ones about how we use our wealth in accordance with our values, and to admit to those times when we don't. Perhaps something we can do as a church is to offer a workshop to parents about how to have a conversation with their children about money, teaching them to be generous and responsible stewards of their wealth. At a diocesan workshop many years ago, we were introduced to Nathan Dungan, a speaker and former financial advisor whose firm, Share, Save, Spend, teaches families how to talk to each other about money, particularly with respect to passing on to future generations the values that guide how people use their wealth. Something like that might be a good idea. So we do not have to be ashamed of our material abundance. What we need to do as followers of Jesus is to ensure that the values that govern how we use our wealth are in accord with the values taught by Jesus. The purpose of wealth is to foster and to facilitate relationships of mutual self-giving and, as I've said, communities characterized by love, generosity, and forgiveness. I don't mean that we should all give more money to the church. What I mean is that we will be happier and more satisfied with our lives if we use our wealth guided by our faith rather than by fear. For it is when we use our wealth in this way, guided by our faith, that our wealth becomes for us a blessing.